Welcome back to the History of Gaming Metal Gear series. On this episode, we will be continuing the history lessons that we've been delivering so far with the game Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. So far in the series, we have completed both Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake on the MSX. We reviewed these titles in full and compared them to games that came out around the same year, as well as did a technical review of Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PlayStation 1 and compared it to games of its time, but then we played through the entire story of Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes to review the story of Metal Gear Solid 1. To do a very short recap, the games are as follows as far as the story is concerned. Metal Gear 1 takes place in the year 1995, where a base in Africa called Outer Heaven needs to be infiltrated, where they have a weapon called Metal Gear. The Special Ops team Foxhound is used to send in infiltration agents. The first one to go in is a man named Frank Yeager by the codename of Gray Fox. He is captured, and that's when we are sent in as Solid Snake. Solid Snake goes through his mission, finds Frank Yeager, gets him out, and then goes after Metal Gear, destroys Metal Gear, and then you find out that Big Boss was actually behind Outer Heaven, this bad guy base, and the building of the Metal Gear weapon. Find out that your mentor, Big Boss, is actually the bad guy. It takes us to Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, which takes place in 1999, 4 years after the original event, where the world is in a major crisis due to the lack of oil. A doctor by the name of Keo Marv comes up with a synthetic oil called Oilix and is kidnapped by a group in a location called Zanzibar Land. Zanzibar is just off of the coast of Russia, or the border of Russia, and they had recently liberated themselves and gained their own independence, and they attempted to go nuclear. They wanted weapons. So Snake is sent in to recover this doctor with this Oilix formula that will save the world from the oil crisis, that was kidnapped by Zanzibar agents, and come to find out Big Boss is not dead, and he's leading the Zanzibar forces, and they have built another Metal Gear. And in the process of destroying that Metal Gear, he finds out that Gray Fox, Frank Yeager, is still alive. They have a fist fight after destroying Metal Gear out in a minefield where Snake wins. And then he has to fight Big Boss for a second time without any weapons, and he has to cobble together a homemade flamethrower and takes out Big Boss once and for all. And then some time passes as those events take place in 1999. It is 2005. Snake is trying to live his life peacefully in Alaska, and he gets pulled in to take care of Foxhound. His former group has gone rogue, and they are now terrorists. And they are holding people hostage at a location called Shadow Moses, which is an island off of Alaska. This is where Snake infiltrates, finds that Foxhound is led by a gentleman named Liquid Snake, and they want $1 billion in the body of Big Boss. This game also introduces Metal Gear Rex, and they're going to use Metal Gear Rex to launch a nuke if their demands are not met. Through the process, this is where the story really takes off in the Metal Gear series. We find that Liquid Snake and Solid Snake are actually genetic brothers of Big Boss. They are clones of him to be the best fighters in the world. There's some talk about how Liquid Snake is the recessive genes, being that he's blonde hair, blue eyes, and Solid Snake is the dominant genes with the dark hair and dark eyes. We also get to meet Ocelot, Revolver Ocelot, one of the members of the Foxhound team. We also have other bosses of the Foxhound team that we take out, like Sniper Wolf and Vulcan Raven and Psycho Mantis. We also run into a cyborg ninja who ends up becoming, or who we end up finding out is Frank Yeager, Gray Fox. In the final battle against Metal Gear Rex, Gray Fox does sacrifice himself to save Snake in a kind of blood brother manner. We also get to meet Otacon for the first time here. Otacon will become a continuing character through the rest of the series. And I believe that is it for Metal Gear Solid 1. Also, well, no, not at all. There is also the element of Foxdie, a virus that was injected into Snake. It is a smart virus that attacks very specific people and causes them to have a heart attack. And he was carrying Foxdie and interacting with all of these different members, particularly the DARPA chief and the president of Arms Tech. Those two people were supposed to be rescued, so Snake thought, but the Foxdie virus was actually sent to eliminate those two individuals as they became a risk for the United States. And then Foxdie inevitably, after multiple fights with Liquid Snake, at the end of the game, Foxdie does kill. So this virus is still running around inside Solid Snake. We do not know when and if it will kill him, but he's decided to not worry about it for the time being and move on with his life. After the credits, we do get a phone call where Revolver Ocelot is speaking with somebody who's clearly his boss, and he reveals that this gentleman is, in fact, the third brother by the name of Solidus Snake. And Solidus Snake also is the president of the United States at this point in time. So we were left off with that little tidbit of cliffhangering. So now we begin the discussion and the history lesson of Metal Gear Solid 2. And to do so, as always, we do talk about Hideo Kojima first. There's not a lot of career details for Hideo around the development of Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. Not a lot's been happening with him as far as things that might help dictate or give light to why he made certain design decisions with particular games. But I do want to bring up another game he's working on around this time, which would be Zone of the Enders. This is a game and anime franchise that comes out in 2001 with a moderate success. Nevertheless, it's a fantastic sci-fi mech series, and it will make appearances and cameos throughout the Metal Gear series. Additionally, Zone of the Enders is on my history of gaming list, so eventually we will get around to playing this series. It's only 2 games. But it was worth noting because it's quite fun. It's a bit of a love of his, and a lot of the fans of Metal Gear are also fans of Zone of the Enders. Now let's talk development of Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Being the 4th Metal Gear game, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty is a direct sequel to Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1, released for new and powerful PlayStation 2 at the time. This title is a weird one, and easily the hardest script I've had to write for yet. Why, you may ask? Well, it's because Metal Gear Solid 2 has an odd place in my heart, as it does many fans. This is due to an amazingly good game, but also hard to accept. This is due to it being an amazingly good game, but also hard to accept as a diehard fan for a significant bait and switch that happens in the storytelling that I won't spoil now, but we'll experience it very soon. This bait and switch really upset a lot of gamers at the time, and even still some people today haven't gotten over it. It was an insanely bold move on Kojima's part, one that panned out pretty amazingly, and I have no idea how he pulled it off now that the series is completed. So we have this game that is really quite good, but toyed with players. So it has this really odd reception. It has fantastic critic reviews, and for good reason. This game's good. And then it's unanimously disliked by fans. So it's this weird in-between. Besides the mixed receptions, there is a lot of things going on in this game that make it equal parts amazing and weird. The majority of the weirdness is the fact that this game gets into deep philosophical ideology. The following are examples of what's discussed throughout the game. Memes. I'm not kidding. Memes, I know. And this is in 2001, no less, and here we are talking about memes. Social engineering, political conspiracies, censorship, the dangers of AI, existentialism, postmodernism, and even post-truth politics. Google that. It's creepy that we're talking about this in 2018. This game came out in 2001, and we're talking about post-truth politics. Mind-blowing. All of this is insanely heavy content to be putting in a video game, but it's in there. I find to be pretty awesome. Who says gamers can't have intelligent, profoundly deep, and thought-provoking thoughts and conversations on these kind of matters? Kojima certainly thinks we can. Something else I like about this game is that we start to see the bad guy team pattern begin here. In Metal Gear 1 and 2 on the MSX, we see these very neat, very characterized, and thematic bosses. And the themes that they have to them lead to how it hinges on them and how they're beaten. For example, in Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, we have the Running Man, who just runs around in circles, so you can't ever chase him, you can never put a bullet on him because he's always on a different screen. That leads you to having to plant mines in hallways and then chase him around these four screens, which go in a square, to force him to run over that hallway and detonate those mines and kill himself. So very thematic, fun things, but we see these kind of thematic bosses continue into Metal Gear Solid 1, but now they have a team name, and that is Foxhound. So of course it's our old unit, but it's the Foxhound team in Metal Gear Solid 1. Here in Metal Gear Solid 2, we see that again, but with a different name, and it's the Sons of Liberty. And this stays consistent throughout the rest of the main entrances. And I like this a lot. It's kind of like a Sinister Six or Legion of Doom kind of thing, and it just makes it really enjoyable that these guys are this, the bad guy Avengers kind of running around with all their neat little powers. So now let's talk mechanics and improvements we see in this game. Some of the following improvements we did see in Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, because remember that game was made as a remake of Metal Gear Solid 1, but after the launch of Metal Gear Solid 2, when they were attempting to bring a lot of the functionality of MGS2 in to Metal Gear Solid 1. First-person aiming with the use of a laser sight to make it even more accessible. This is something we saw in Twin Snakes. The introduction of squad tactics amongst AI enemies and guards. Essentially, the bad guys don't act independent anymore. They help each other. They do security sweeps. They're smart now. We also saw a little bit of this in Twin Snakes. And here it is, probably the biggest element of this game, an expanded cover mechanic introducing the pop out and shoot feature. This was industry changing. That's what History of Gaming is about. We're talking about what games changed the industry. This changed the industry. There are cover systems in video games before Metal Gear Solid 2, but they're mostly in arcade games, titles like Time Crisis. But when we're talking cover systems the way we know it today on home consoles, MGS2 is where we see it modernized and become feasible. That's right. I'm saying it. Gears of War owes everything to Metal Gear Solid. There wouldn't have been a Gears of War. They would have scrapped the whole thing. Nobody would have ever made it. Ever. It's not even feasible. Metal Gear Solid 2 should be in the credits of Gears of War. Persistent bodies. Bodies that don't despawn can be spotted now, which is another thing to worry about. We do see this in Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. So in Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PlayStation 1, bodies do despawn, so you don't have to worry about them. But in Twin Snakes, they do stick around, so you have to hide bodies. And that is the reason why in Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PlayStation 1, there's not lockers, and there is in Twin Snakes, because you gotta hide bodies in lockers. In Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, enemies can now detect your shadows in addition to the noises you make. So before it was just noises, now they can see your shadow and be alerted to you. And then what I think to be the neatest feature of this game is lights can be shot out. This leaves enemies in the dark, and it changes drastically how combat operates. This isn't something that you have to do. A lot of times when people talk about a mechanic or a feature that's added to a video game, it's part of the game. It's a crutch that the game leans on. Hideo keeps adding elements to the game, and you don't need to even interact with them. You could just leave them alone, but they're still there, and it makes it that much cooler. So we're never going to have to shoot out the lights in the game, but we have the ability to. Something else that's in Metal Gear Solid 2 that's really neat is just the object interactivity that you don't get in other games. Like, you can shoot fire extinguishers in Metal Gear Solid 2, and it puts a bunch of smoke in the air, which can be used for multiple things. It's just a cool game. This game, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, was released on November 13th, 2001 for the PlayStation 2. It had a production cost of over $10 million and shipped over 7 million copies. It holds a Metacritic score of 96%, making it one of the highest ranked games in history. But with a user score of 8.7 out of 10, that's a significant disparity between the two. games that we'll be comparing this to are pretty significant. This is a pretty significant list of rememberable games from 2001. These games are Max Payne, Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction, which was the expansion pack, Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Silent Hill 2, Baldur's Gate 2, Clive Barker's Undying, Alien vs. Predator 2, which was a fantastic multiplayer game with a decent single-player story, Black and White, which comes from Lionhead Studios, the people who created the Fable series. Black and White's a fantastic PC game that definitely needs a remake. Conker's Bad Fur Day, of course, is a huge fan favorite. Jak and Daxter, Sonic Adventure 2, Soul Reaver, and then these two legendary titles, Super Smash Bros. Melee and Grand Theft Auto 3, all come out in 2001. Fantastic titles to be held up to the legend that is Metal Gear Solid 2. Very good games, very good games. So it's hard to stack one game up against all of that. But you know, with the exception of Smash Brothers, which really had a competitive success and not so much a single player success, and Grand Theft Auto 3, which had a massive single player success, Metal Gear Solid 2 is up there. It's very, very good. After 2 years, we would see a re-release of this title under the name of Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance. It is initially launched for the Microsoft Xbox on November 4th of 2002, but will receive a staggered release to the PS2 and PC on March 3rd and March 27th of the following year, respectively. This version of the game mostly boasts a 500 standalone mission. This is something not unlike what we see in Metal Gear Solid VR missions. We also have 5 missions called the Snake Tales. They help flush out a bit of the story from the game that goes unseen, and these missions have a low production value, so there is no voice acting in it. Lastly, this version of the game has a skateboarding mode based on Evolution skateboarding in it. This feature did not make it to the HD collection version of MGS2 Substance on the PS3, and therefore is exclusive to the PlayStation 2 version, as it also did not appear on the PC or Xbox version. Well, with that being the case, that ends the history of gaming Metal Gear history lesson on Metal Gear Solid 2. We'll now take it over to the gameplay. I'm getting so much audio crack.